You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. And we have a most interesting show for you today, which is all in one way or another about sex, but sex in a, well, not clinical sense. Well, you'll see as we go on. But we have studies in what's happening with young people on sex, and that's a kind of riveting subject. And our guest is a go-to source and subject and expert in terms of sexual crimes against women and what we do about them. Did you know that Harvey Weinstein may be about to get out and walk free? I did not know. And circumcision, but this time, male circumcision. Not that we've dealt with and finished with female genital mutilation, but a woman's work is never done. So we have to expand the field again. Anyway, all that is coming right up. But first, we need to go inside the headlines. In an opinion piece for the New York Times, during April, Peggy Orenstein, the writer, took on the issue of a troubling trend in teenage sex, choking. Now, if you've never heard of choking as a hot new thing, well, you're hearing about it now. There's always something, isn't it? Well, she's tracking and interviewing and discussing this subject with Dr. Debbie Herbenick, who's one of the foremost researchers on American sexual behavior and is the director of the Center for Sexual Health Promotion at Indiana University and the author of the book, Yes, Your Kid. And Dr. Herbenick has been tracking the rapid rise of rough sex, so-called, among college students, particularly sexual strangulation, or what is colloquially referred to as choking. Nearly 2/3 of women in her most recent campus representative survey of 5,000 students at an anonymized major Midwestern university said a partner had choked them during sex 1/3 in their most recent encounter. The rate of those women who said they were between the ages 12 and 17 the first time that happened had shot up to 40% from 1 in 4. Now, the author of this particular piece, Orenstein, points out that she's been writing for well over a decade about young people's attitudes and early experiences with sex in all its forms, and she'd also begun clocking this phenomenon, starting in early 2020 when a 16-year-old girl at an independent high school during a Q&A session asked her, "How come boys all want to choke you?" What? In a different class, a 15-year-old boy wanted to know, "Why do all girls want to be choked?" They do? Not long after, a college sophomore and longtime interview subject contacted the author of this piece after her roommate came home in tears because a hookup partner, without warning, had put both hands on her throat and squeezed. Well, another sophomore confided that she enjoyed being choked by her boyfriend, but it was important for her partner to be, quote, properly educated, pressing on the sides of the neck, for example, rather than the trachea. There is no safe way, it should be noted, to strangle someone. A male freshman said girls expected to be choked, and even though he didn't want to do it, refusing would make him seem like a simp. And a senior in high school got angry when her friends called her vanilla because she complained that her boyfriend had choked her. Now, sexual strangulation, feminists know, is nearly always brought on by or educated by or promulgated by women in heterosexual pornography. That's long been a staple on free sites, which are default sources of sex ed for teens. And as with anything else, repeat exposure can render the once appalling appealing. It's not uncommon for behaviors to be normalized in porn, move within a few years to mainstream media, and then, in what may become a feedback loop, be adopted in the bedroom or in the dorm room. So, there are so many examples of this. The chorus of Jack Harlow's "Lovin' on Me," which topped Billboard's Hot 100 chart for 6 non-consecutive weeks last winter, and has been viewed over 99 million times on YouTube, starts with, "I'm vanilla, baby. I'll choke you, but I ain't no killer, baby." How-to articles apparently abound on the internet, and social media algorithms feed young people, but obviously not their unsuspecting parents, hundreds of #ChokeMeDaddy memes, along with memes that mock or even celebrate the potential for hurting or killing female partners. This is, well, there's no other word for it, it's propaganda. Many experienced BDSM, bondage, dominance, sadomasochistic practitioners actually discourage choking, believing it to be too dangerous. Oh my God. There are still relatively few studies on the subject, and most have been done by Dr. Herbenek and her colleagues, but reports among adolescents are now trickling in from the United Kingdom, Australia, Iceland, New Zealand, and Italy. 20 years ago, sexual asphyxiation appears to have been quite unusual among any demographic, let alone young people new to sex. But that's changed radically, and at least among straight kids, it's noticeable that they like receiving oral sex in hookups, but those who like that tend to favor men. Those that might entail pain or submission, like choking, are generally more for women. This requires a lot of serious examination. Either way, most say their partners never or only sometimes asked before grabbing their necks. For many, there were moments when they couldn't breathe or speak, compromising the ability to withdraw consent if they'd been given it. No wonder that in a separate study by Dr. Herbenek, choking was among the most frequently listed sex acts young women said had scared them, reporting that it sometimes actually made them worry whether they'd survive. What a way to be introduced to sexual activity, my God. Some young women never climax with a partner. Quite a few, perhaps most of college age. While the prevalence of choking has skyrocketed, rates of orgasm among young women have not increased, nor has the orgasm gap, as it's called, disappeared among heterosexual couples. It indicates they're not doing other things to enhance female arousal or pleasure, Dr. Herbenek says. When, for instance, she asked one male student who said he'd choked his partner whether he'd ever tried using a vibrator instead, he recoiled. "Why would I do that?" he asked. Perhaps, she responded, because it would be more likely to produce orgasm without risking, death. Well, in her interviews and in that of the author of this article, college students had seen male orgasm as a given, and women's as nice if it happens, but certainly not expected or necessarily prioritized by either partner. Keisuke Kawata, a neuroscientist at Indiana's University's School of Public Health, was one of the first researchers to sound the alarm on how the cumulative, seemingly inconsequential, subconcussive hits football players sustain, as opposed to the occasional hard blow, how these were key to triggering CTE, the degenerative brain disease. And he's a very good judge of serious threats to the brain. And in response to Dr. Herbenek's work, he's turning his attention now to sexual strangulation. "I see a similarity," he says, though the mechanism of injury is very different. In this case, it is oxygen-blocking pressure to the throat, frequently in light, repeated bursts of a few seconds each. Strangulation, sexual or otherwise, often leaves few visible marks and can be easily overlooked as a cause of death. Those whose experiences are non-lethal rarely seek medical attention because any injuries seem minor. Young women Dr. Herbenek studied mostly reported lightheadedness, headaches, neck pain, temporary loss of coordination, and ear ringing. The symptoms resolve and all seems well. But as with those players, the true effects are silent, potentially not showing up for days, weeks, even years. And undergraduate women who have been repeatedly choked show a reduction in cortical folding in their brain compared with never choked groups. They also showed widespread cortical thickening and an inflammation-based response that is associated with elevated risk of later onset mental illness. The hemispheres in the choked group's brains also were badly skewed, with the right side hyperactive and the left underperforming. Now, consider that every year Dr. Herbenek has done her survey. The number of females reporting extreme effects from strangulation, neck swelling, loss of consciousness, losing control of urinary function, has crept up. Among those who've been choked, the rate of becoming what students call cloudy, close to passing out but not crossing the line, is now 1 in 5, a huge proportion. The physical, cognitive, and psychological impacts of sexual choking are quite disturbing. So is the idea that at a time when women's social, economic, educational, and political power are in ascent, even if sometimes challenged, this popularization of a sex act that can damage our brains, impair intellectual functioning, undermine mental health, even kill us, is rather arresting. The European Union, always progressive and a good model, calls for evidence-based porn literacy to be taught in schools. Of course, getting pornography taught in schools, even if it is clearly against what is being taught, itself means to contract the right wing in a way that is its own kind of death. But there is precedent for accountability. The EU now requires age verification of the world's largest porn sites in ways that preserve user privacy, whatever that actually means on the internet. And that discussion, unsurprisingly, has been politicized. Social media platforms have already been pushed to ban content promoting eating disorders, self-harm, and suicide, but they should likewise be pressured to ban content promoting choking. This can be done. Young people's sexual scripts are shaped by what they watch, scroll by, and listen to in unprecedentedly high numbers. They deserve and they need, and they have a right to, models of interaction that are respectful, communicative, mutual, and at the very least, not murderous. It's time for our first break, but then I'll be back directly with our guest for today. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Jane Manning, my guest for the conversation today, is a former sex crimes prosecutor, a victim rights advocate, and the leading expert in criminal justice and violence against women. As director of the Women's Equal Justice, she helps survivors of sexual assault navigate the criminal justice system. She began her career as a prosecutor of domestic violence, sex crimes, and child abuse. And then in private practice, she represented a coalition of battered women's organizations, arguing successfully for reversal of a court decision allowing men who murdered wives or girlfriends to invoke the victim's, quote, nagging as a mitigating factor. She then joined the international human rights organization Equality Now, where she coordinated a successful campaign for a strong, comprehensive law against human trafficking in New York State and helped draft New York's first anti-trafficking statute. She served as president of the New York City chapter of Now, where she helped lead successful campaigns to repeal New York's statute of limitations on rape and to criminalize strangulation attacks. God, the things you have to do. At Women's Equal Justice, she's working to improve the justice system's response to sexual assault, including the violent and under-prosecuted crime of drug-facilitated sexual assault. She is really a go-to person for these issues, and it's my delight to welcome Jane Manning. Jane, welcome back to Women's Media Center Live. I'm so glad you're back here today.
Thank you, Robin. It's wonderful to be back.
Well, you are back because, well, first of all, you're the go-to person on everything that is basically in forms of sexual violence against women, because you were a former prosecutor and a brilliant prosecutor, and because of your current position as a director of Women's Equal Justice, particularly in helping survivors of sexual assault navigate what is laughingly known as the criminal justice system. And we're facing a situation, or maybe conceivably by the time this airs, could have already faced it, where Harvey Weinstein, his boo, bad, multiple harasser and rapist, and who is serving many, many years in prison,
yes,
is up for parole and release. And the basic tenets of that you're going to go into, because this will be a huge blow. So tell us about it. Give us background and bring us up to date, Jane.
Great. And it's actually not a parole proceeding. It's an appeal proceeding.
Oh, yeah. He wants the whole kit and the caboodle. He doesn't want to be convicted in the first place.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, take it away, because it's really, how can I say it? It stiffens the spine, to say the least.
Boy, it really does, Robin. So Harvey Weinstein, as you know, is serving time for rape convictions that juries handed down against him, both in New York and in California. He's serving 23 years on his New York conviction, and he's serving a 16-year sentence in his California conviction. He has appealed both of those convictions. But the one that I'd love to talk with you about today is the appeal of his New York State conviction, because his New York conviction was upheld by New York's Intermediate Appellate Court. But New York State's highest court, which is called the Court of Appeals, has granted Harvey Weinstein permission to file a further appeal, which they didn't have to do. It was discretionary on the court's part. And so it kind of got everyone's attention when they granted him leave to file this additional appeal. And the main issue in this appeal is the fact that when Harvey Weinstein was tried in New York for assaulting 3 women, the trial judge allowed 3 additional women, and remember, that's only 3 out of the scores of women who reported abuse by Harvey Weinstein. But out of those scores of women, 3 of them were allowed to come in and testify to similar crimes that Weinstein committed against them. And so in addition to the 3 women that he was on trial for assaulting, there were 3 additional women who testified that these alleged assaults were part of a pattern of behavior that Weinstein committed. And Weinstein is claiming that this evidence was a violation of his due process, and he wants to have his conviction reversed on these grounds.
But excuse me, let me interrupt here for a second with you should excuse the expression, some common sense questions.
Please bring on the common sense questions.
As a civilian, a non-lawyer, I mean, isn't this pattern of behavior central to criminal trials? I mean, if somebody has murdered before, they want to know the priors. If somebody, for that matter, they want to know the priors if they've been caught for thieving or whatever they've been caught for. They always want to know the what's the pattern of behavior, and so much of every case rests on that, doesn't it?
The common sense answer to that question is, of course it's important. And just imagine being a survivor of sexual assault who is on trial, who is having your credibility attacked, who is going into court with much of the conviction resting on your testimony. Imagine knowing that there are other women who had similar experiences with this same abuser. And the question is, will the jury be allowed to know that those other women even exist? So
Right.
imagine what it would feel like to be that survivor. And of course, the common sense answer to that question is yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
duh.
the jury should be allowed to know.
It's duh, actually. Okay.
It's duh. That's an even better answer. Thank you, Robin. Traditionally in New York State, New York law has been very restrictive about allowing that kind of evidence, not just in sexual assault, but in all kinds of crimes. New York law has said that in most cases, that kind of evidence should be concealed from the jury. They should not be allowed to know that a defendant has committed similar crimes. Now, there are...
Why?
Yeah,
How?
why?
Yeah.
So I'd like to get into that, but let me say first that what New York law says is that this kind of evidence shouldn't be allowed in just as kind of general bad character evidence, but it should be allowed under specific circumstances. It should be allowed, for example, if the prosecution has to prove the defendant's state of mind, if they have to prove his state of intent or motive or knowledge of something, that kind of evidence should be allowed in to prove that kind of issue. And what the trial judge in Harvey Weinstein's case said is, even under the narrow exceptions allowed under New York state law, I find that this evidence is admissible in Harvey Weinstein's case. Why? Because when Harvey Weinstein was on trial, one of the things the prosecution had to prove is that Harvey Weinstein knew that these women were not consenting. So one of the things he was charged with was rape in the third degree. And that is New York's no means no statute. And it required the prosecution to prove that the victims of Harvey Weinstein's abuse said no, and that Harvey Weinstein imposed sexual acts on them anyway. But it also required the prosecution, imposed an additional burden on the prosecution. Prosecution had to prove that the women, when they said no, they meant no, and that Harvey Weinstein knew that they meant no. The prosecution had to prove all that.
Oh my God.
And what the trial judge said is that, okay, given that the prosecution has to prove that he knew that these women meant no, it's really relevant to show that a bunch of other women said no to him, and he used force and coercion and all kinds of other methods.
Yeah, precisely.
To impose sex on all those other women.
That's a sensible judge.
Consent.
Yeah.
And that was the trial judge's ruling. And the intermediate appellate court agreed with him, and they said, look, there is a world where the jury says, some of the women that Harvey Weinstein was charged with assaulting, in fact, both of the women that he was convicted of assaulting in New York State, had relationships with Harvey Weinstein both before and after the alleged sexual assaults. And that is a true fact. I mean, what Weinstein did with a lot of these women is...
if you don't continue this, your career is kaput. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so the court said, the jury could have looked at this evidence and said, well, both of these women had ongoing relationships with Weinstein. Maybe he really thought that they were consenting. Maybe he really believes that they said no, but they meant yes. And we know that that's something that people sometimes believe about women.
Yeah.
I will tell you, Robin, my criminal law professor at NYU Law School once said in our law school class, he said, I believe that women of a certain socioeconomic stratum say no when they mean yes.
Well,
He said
terrific.
that. That's what I was taught in criminal law
My
class by my
God.
criminal law professor. And so the New York State's appellate division said, well, what if some of the jurors think that? Maybe they ought to hear that there were a lot of women who said no to Harvey Weinstein. And one by one, he used force or coercion or entrapment to impose sex on all of those women without them wanting it. We, the court, think that that's relevant to showing his state of mind when these two women said no. We think it's relevant to help the jury.
It's also minimal common sense. Yeah, go ahead. I'm just sitting here feeling outraged, but go ahead.
It's minimal common sense. And so those were the grounds on which the trial court allowed that evidence to be heard, and the appellate division upheld that evidence. Okay.
Oh, good. So.
Now, New York State's highest court has granted him leave to appeal to the highest court, and he did appeal to the highest court. And many feminists in New York State were concerned when we learned that the highest court had given him leave to appeal, because, again, he didn't have an automatic right to appeal. The court had to grant him leave to appeal, and they did grant that leave to appeal. And so a lot of prosecutors and a lot of women's rights advocates were asking, well, why did they do that?
Yeah, why did they do that?
Why did they do that? And so feminists decided that this was not a moment for sitting back and waiting to see what happened. We decided to file an amicus brief to ensure that the voices of survivors and victims and advocates for women's rights were heard in the process of this appeal to New York State's highest court. Because the truth is, if this conviction were to be reversed by New York State's highest court,
everything.
Oh my God.
Everything
think
is
about
up.
Think about the implications for the momentum of the Me Too movement. But also what I want people to understand is that there would be very serious implications for, in terms of setting precedent for future New York State cases, meaning that the already narrow window under which the trial judge allowed this evidence to be heard by the jury, the already narrow window under which every now and then a survivor gets to allow a jury to know that there were other victims, that already narrow window would slam shut.
Oh my God, Jane, this is terrible. I mean, this is really alarming.
It is alarming, and that's why we decided it wasn't a moment to sit on our hands. So what we did is a coalition of women's rights organizations pulled together, and we filed an amicus brief with the New York State Court of Appeals. And it was major feminist organizations like Sanctuary for Families and Legal Momentum and the National Women's Law Center. It was women of color-led organizations like Esperanza and Her University and Womankind and VIP Mujeres. It was organizations that combat sexual assault like Joyful Heart. It was New York-based organizations like the New York State Coalition Against Sexual Assault that are really concerned about the implications for New York. It was feminist hero attorneys like Mary Haviland and Dorchen Leithold. And it was my organization, Women's Equal Justice, which serves survivors of sexual assault.
This is amazing and very impressive.
And many organizations that I haven't even listed in that list. It was a phenomenal coalition. And we were represented pro bono by the wonderful law firm Covington and Burling and by a team of absolutely brilliant women feminist attorneys at Covington. Nancy Kessenbaum, Carolyn Corwin, Seema Vitlani, Laura Richardson represented us pro bono in filing this brief with the New York State Court of Appeals. And what the brief argues is that the evidence that was allowed by the trial judge was admissible under well-established New York law, and that the Court of Appeals doesn't have to go out on a limb to uphold this conviction. They can uphold it under comfortable existing precedent.
Right.
But we also argued that this is an opportunity for the Court of Appeals to open the door more widely to this kind of evidence in future trials.
Oh, how brilliant.
And what we said is that the precedent under which this case is governed is called People versus Molyneux. That's the name of the case that sets the precedent in this area of law. And what Molyneux says is you can't allow similar crimes evidence just to show that a defendant has a criminal propensity. But you can use it to show specific issues that are relevant to the charges at hand. And what the trial judge in Harvey Weinstein's case said is, I find that this evidence is relevant to two things. It's relevant to his knowledge and his state of mind. We already talked about that, Robin, that he understood that no meant no.
Yeah.
He understood this.
And his behavior, doesn't that
yes.
count?
So the trial judge said it's relevant to his state of mind, but the trial judge said it's relevant to something else too. Harvey Weinstein is asserting a consent defense, and it's relevant to rebut that consent defense.
Yeah.
And what we are arguing to New York State's highest court is listen to what the trial judge said and recognize that rebutting a consent defense should be a newly recognized grounds for allowing in evidence of similar crimes.
Oh,
Why?
That's interesting. That's so interesting and very good.
It's interesting, and it would be groundbreaking if the New
Yeah,
York State
it
Court of
would.
Appeals did it. And
But it
we
would
say,
cover
here's-
so many more victims. My God. Yeah, go on, Jane. It's fascinating.
It would cover so many more victims. And the argument that we make as to why this should be admissible is we make a few arguments. Sex crimes are usually committed in isolation. We know this. They're committed behind closed doors. And that's because the perpetrator chooses the time and place of the offense and often sets up the time and place of the offense. And so by design, these crimes happen in isolation, and the trials are often a matter of one person's word against another's.
Right.
Not only that, but in that battle of one person's word against another's, we know that victims often face an uphill battle because we live in a culture where there are these entrenched dynamics of rape myths, of blaming the victim, and of excessive disbelief. So victims of rape who testify in court often face a level of skepticism that's not just a sort of healthy presumption of innocence. It's a level of reflexive disbelief that goes way beyond what victims of other crimes
That's
face.
why we refer to it as rape all over again.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And so we say that's why it is only fair under those circumstances for the jury to hear it's not just one victim's word against this man.
Exactly.
It's multiple women.
Numbers are the only thing that makes a real difference then, that puts it in context. Hello, whatever happened to context?
Context is so crucial in these cases, and you've anticipated what I think is the most important argument that we make on this issue of consent, and it is this. We talk in the brief about offenders who deliberately shape the circumstances under which they commit these assaults to manufacture an appearance of consent. And the brief actually talks about a case that my organization, Women's Equal Justice, worked on, which was a woman who was very violently strangled and raped by a predator. And she found out a month later that he had done almost exactly the same thing to another woman. And what was so gaslighting about both of these assaults is that after the rape, he forced my client, my survivor, to cuddle with him after the rape.
Oh my God.
What she later learned about the other woman, who was a very young woman, is that he had done, and neither of these women knew each other, but that he had done the same thing to this other woman, strangled her, raped her, and then forced her to cuddle in bed with him after the assault. Now, imagine being my survivor who goes into court and has to testify. And yes, after the sexual assault, we lay in bed and we cuddled. And you could well imagine a jury saying, that's not plausible to me that a victim would lie in bed and cuddle with him after being raped by him.
But the reason that is not valid is because of what we know about real rape.
Absolutely.
And if we don't have examples of real rape and all of the disguises and masks that it wears and manipulations, we can't have a case. So, oh God, this is
and you could imagine a jury saying, well, cuddling, that sounds to us like consent. But what if the jury knew that there was another woman on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, as had happened in this case, who never met my victim, who told the same story, and she also was forced to cuddle with him. Now something in that case that looks like consent is looking less like consent, and it's looking more like a pattern of behavior by the offender.
Absolutely, Jane. So you put this argument into your filing.
Yes, that argument is in the brief that was filed by Covington Burling on our behalf. Yes, we argue that in the brief.
And also, we don't know yet.
And we also address in the brief, because you asked me earlier in this conversation, why is this evidence normally not allowed? And I want to answer that question. The answer is, the courts have traditionally been afraid that if you allow in this evidence of similar crimes, that the jury will be overcome by prejudice against the defendant, and that they will rush right past the evidence and rush to a conviction. And what's so important, and what we point out in the brief, is look at how it played out in Harvey Weinstein's own trials. The first one in New York and the second one in California. Both of those juries heard evidence of similar crimes by Weinstein, and neither jury rushed to a conviction. They deliberated for days. They asked for testimony to be read back. They asked for the judge's instructions to be read back. They also issued verdicts where they convicted him on some counts and they acquitted him on other counts. Nothing about that suggests a jury that is overrun by prejudice.
On the contrary, what it suggests is that, in fact, I'm afraid, so far in the history of rape and jurisprudence, that most juries, like most, people who haven't thought about this, who aren't feminists, who don't care, will think, all of the cliches. She asked for it.
Right.
She should have said no more clearly. She really meant yes. I mean, all of those cliches are cliches for a reason. They're cliches because they're overused in defending lies. I mean, this is incredible, Jane. I'm sorry. Go on. I'm just aghast.
We know that jurors are people like the rest of us, and that they come in to the courtroom with whatever biases and whatever opinions they had before the trial began. But we also know that juries endeavor to be fair. And to me, the hard work that both of these juries did in New York and California, it doesn't suggest a jury that came in with no prior worldview, but it does suggest two juries that really tried to look at all the evidence and did their best to issue a verdict, for better or for worse, that took everything they knew into account. And certainly it suggests two juries that were not overcome by prejudice against Harvey Weinstein. If you look also at other recent high-profile trials, if you look at Bill Cosby, if you look at Donald Trump in E. Jean Carroll's civil lawsuit against him, both of those trials were ones where the jurors were allowed to hear about other similar crimes by both of those defendants. And in neither case did those juries rush to a conviction. They deliberated, they acquitted on some counts, they found the defendant liable on some counts. And so, again, we're not asking for a jury, we're not asking for a system where all the advantage goes to the complaining witness. We're just asking for a system where the jury has enough context to be able to consider all of the relevant evidence. And the behavior of the juries in the Harvey Weinstein and these other trials that I've mentioned suggest that the juries really did work hard to do exactly that.
I see. Well, what do you think will happen when the what was the verdict, the answer, the response comes in, and what will we do? What can we do if it succeeds, and what can we do? What do we have to do if it fails?
So what do we think will happen? It's really hard to tell. The appeal to the Court of Appeals was argued in February. I attended the oral argument. It was very clear that there were some judges on the Court of Appeals who were really leaning towards reversing Weinstein's conviction. And it was also clear that there were other judges who were fighting to uphold Weinstein's conviction.
What court is this? Is this a Court of Appeals? Is this a court?
So yes.
Uh-huh.
This is New York State's Court of Appeals, which is the highest state court in New York.
Okay.
And it was evident to me, attending that oral argument, that this conviction could go either way. And you ask the question, well, what does that mean for us as a movement, depending on how the outcome goes? And my answer to that is, whatever happens, whatever the outcome of Harvey Weinstein's case, we have a lot of work to do to make our justice system fairer for victims. It's not just this issue of similar crimes evidence. It's other issues like the absence of rape shield laws in civil lawsuits, like the E. Jean Carroll suit. It's the need for better police units that are better trained. It's the need for better laws on the rape of an incapacitated or mentally disabled victim. It's the need for more federal involvement in investigating drug-facilitated sexual assault and drink spiking. And so there are so many areas where we have so much work left to do. And, legal accountability for rape was once a pillar of the feminist movement, and it needs to become a major focus of the feminist movement again, because we have come a very long way, Robin, thanks to you and your second wave feminist sisters, but we have a long way still to go. And that responsibility now falls to my generation and coming generations of feminists to continue working to make sure that the justice system moves more in the direction of allowing survivors a fair chance at justice, which is what they're asking for.
Oh, Jane, you are a wonder among women. You really are, because that's the most quick, succinct encapsulation of a very complicated issue, which seems simple at first and then isn't and then is again, that I've ever heard. And it's very valuable, because this has to be a real centerpiece for feminism going forward, not only in New York State, but anywhere else that this is embedded somehow in the law. Oh, my God. Wow. Well, thank you for all the work that you do just normally, being you and being the go-to person on this issue. Thank you for the work that you do with Women's Equal Justice, and thank you for being with us on Women's Media Center Live. Bless your dear heart. Now I feel I know what's going on, and now I can be ready to, well, not celebrate, but heave a sigh of relief if Weinstein's conviction is upheld, and roll up my sleeves yet again for the 10,000th time if it passes through. Thank you, Jane. Bless your dear heart.
Thank you so much, Robin. Bless you right back.
Stay tuned. We're going to take one more break, and then it's time for Fighting Words. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Mortifying the human body. Those are fighting words. Once again, recently, I found myself reminded of how much work there is yet to do. For instance, the worldwide outrage over attempts by the Parliament recently of the African state, the Gambia, to reinstate FGM, female genital mutilation, by lifting the ban against it, making the Gambia the world's first nation to do so. The issue will finally be decided in June, and certainly feminists in the Gambia, elsewhere in Africa, and worldwide are furiously organizing to combat this undoing this great leap backward. Yet I couldn't help thinking that on this one issue alone, the organizing efforts need to be intense and ceaseless. I also couldn't help thinking, with some guilt, about how feminists had largely dropped the issue of male circumcision in our global ongoing fight against the female and much more severe version, from which literally millions of little girls had died. When that issue of female genital mutilation began slowly coming to light worldwide in the 1980s, both practices were certainly being opposed by scientists, feminists, progressives, humanitarians, health and medical experts, and in general good people who felt there was no need to mutilate the human body to appease imaginary gods in rituals that really are about power and control, not spirituality. Male circumcision is certainly one of the oldest known human surgical procedures, with historical records and archaeological evidence dating the practice back to ancient Egyptians in the 23rd century BCE. In Israel, neonatal male circumcision is routine practice. But the ancient Jewish practice of male circumcision, following on the arch-patriarchal mission of Abraham's quite willing almost sacrifice of his son Isaac to the thunderous, jealous God Yahweh of the Old Testament, well, as with every other practice of bodily mortification, hundreds of misinformation bits and outright lies have sprung up about it. That it was all a matter of cleanliness, penile cleansing and hygiene, that it was necessary in the desert because sand grains got in under the foreskin, that it was an identifying sign of who was a Jewish male and who was not, and that it made the penis more attractive. Yet we don't cut off our ears when they need cleaning. We just clean them. Nor do we have special means of sanitation for our genitals in different climates. As an identifying act of who was a male Jew and who was not, however, the practice soon became established, both as a matter of pride and as a marker for persecution. In 1877, a book by John Harvey Kellogg, yes, the co-inventor, honest to God, of the cornflake, not a scientist. Well, his book solidified the practice of male circumcision as an inevitable health procedure in the United States. No one has yet offered a sane reason for the popularity this practice soon enjoyed in hospitals across the country, but popular it became and remained. Peer pressure certainly has been an element, as was being modern, thus supposedly scientific. Though to this day, no serious medical expert has ever found a rational reason for this cruel practice other than religious or cultural ritual. The ritual has been largely medicalized and sanitized, and is in fact slowly but surely going out of style. But that infants are subjected to the shock and pain, newborn infants, 8 days old, to the trauma of this operation, this is undeniable, this fact, no matter how rigorously and religiously defended. And ironically, not Judaism, but Islam is the largest religious group to practice male circumcision. With the global spread of Islam from the 7th century AD, male circumcision was widely adopted among previously non-circumcising peoples. There's no clearly prescribed age for circumcision in Islam, although the Prophet Muhammad recommended it be carried out at an early age and reportedly circumcised his sons on the 7th day after birth. Wow, poor babies. Many Muslims perform the rite on this day, although a Muslim may be circumcised at any age between birth and puberty. The Coptic Christians in Egypt and the Ethiopian Orthodox Christians, two of the oldest surviving forms of Christianity, retain many of the features of early Christianity, including male circumcision. But it's not prescribed in other forms of Christianity. In the New Testament, St. Paul wrote, "In Christ neither circumcision nor uncircumcision count for anything." That's in Galatians 5:6. And a papal bull issued in 1442 by the Roman Catholic Church stated that male circumcision was unnecessary. Some Christian churches in South Africa oppose the practice, viewing it as a pagan ritual, while others include the Nomia Church in Kenya, requiring circumcision for membership, and participants in focus group discussions in Zambia and Malawi mentioned similar beliefs that Christians should practice circumcision since Jesus was circumcised and the Bible teaches the practice. But non-religious reasons for this practice proliferate for many thousands of years in sub-Saharan Africa, in many ethnic groups around the world, including Aboriginal Australasians, the Aztecs, the Mayans in the Americas, inhabitants of the Philippines and eastern Indonesia, and of various Pacific islands, including Fiji and the Polynesian Islands. In the majority of these cultures, circumcision is an integral part of the rite of passage to manhood. Although originally it may have been a test of bravery and endurance, it's associated with factors such as masculinity, social cohesion, with boys of the same age who become circumcised at the same time, with self-identity, and with spirituality. And the rituals usually encircle the main theme, which is the child being redefined as an adult. And the desire to belong is also likely to be the main factor among the high rate of adult male circumcisions among immigrants to Israel from non-circumcising countries like the Soviet Union. It's also performed to eliminate any possible signs or suspicions of sexual ambiguity, which is interesting, and is supported by the fact that many rituals attach specific meaning to circumcision that would justify its purpose in this context. For example, certain ethnic groups, including the Dogon and the Dowayo of West Africa and the Xhosa of South Africa, view the foreskin as the feminine element of the penis, the removal of which, along with passing certain tests, makes a man of the child. Of course, some of these same societies believe that female genital mutilation removes any signs of the clitoris becoming the penis, when anatomically they are very much related. Tradition plays a major part for many ethnic groups. Among ethnic groups of Bendel State in southern Nigeria, 43% of men stated their motivation was to maintain their tradition. In some settings where circumcision is the norm, there's huge discrimination against non-circumcised men. For certain tribes in Uganda, it's unacceptable to remain uncircumcised. Among the Xhosa in South Africa, men who have not been circumcised can suffer extreme forms of punishment, including bullying and beatings. A survey in Denver in the United States, where circumcision occurs shortly after birth, found that parents, especially fathers, of newborn boys cited social reasons as the main determinant for choosing circumcision. That is, not wanting the son to, quote, look different from the father. In the Philippines, where circumcision is almost universal and typically occurs at age 10 to 14, a survey of boys found 2/3 of those surveyed choosing to be circumcised simply to avoid being uncircumcised, and 41% stating it was, quote, part of the tradition. Social concerns were also the primary reason for circumcision in South Korea, with 61% of respondents in one study believing they would be ridiculed by peers unless they were circumcised. In a number of countries, socioeconomic factors also influence circumcision prevalence, especially in countries with more recent uptake of the practice, such as English-speaking industrialized countries. When male circumcision was first practiced in the United Kingdom in the late 19th and early 20th century, it was most prevalent among the upper classes. In the United States, a review of 4.7 million newborn male circumcisions nationwide between 1988 and 2000 also found a significant association with private insurance and higher socioeconomic status. The fall in infant circumcisions is concomitant with demographic changes, most notably the increase in the proportion of Hispanic peoples, traditionally non-circumcised, in Western states, but also, the withdrawal of Medicaid coverage in 18 states, and growing. A risk-benefit analysis shows that benefits to withdrawal of coverage vastly exceed risks. Among younger men across all racial and ethnic groups, studies found that both black and white men were circumcised more often in comparison with other racial ethnic groups, supporting the role that socio-cultural factors play in circumcision practices. Still, old defenses and new wrinkles on old defenses go on surfacing, like the arguments that it protects you against HIV/AIDS. But for every pro, there are multiple cons, scientifically based on this issue, which boils down really to superstition, the desire to belong, to tradition, and to peer pressure over manhood, or rather, long outlived traditions of what makes a man, and for that matter, makes a woman. So it's time for me, at least, to go back to my original position and a 1960s and 1970s position of being an equal opportunity denouncer of sins against the precious human body, whether male or female, committed in the name of some abstract God, but with a result only of pain and grief to poor, newborn, fragile, beautiful human beings. And that's our show for this week. You can follow me on social media at The Robin Morgan. You can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net, and you can find my new novel, Parallax, and my just-out new book of poems, Harvesting Darkness, wherever books are sold. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Views expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer, as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer for this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us next time on Women's Media Center Live.